Hello everyone, and welcome to the NAGDA Legislative Update webinar. We're so glad you joined us today. Before we get started with the presentation, we want to let you know about a few housekeeping items. First, please remain muted throughout the call so the presentation isn't interrupted. At the end of the presentation, there will be a question and answer period. Throughout the call, you may submit questions through your web console. Simply locate the question and answer panel on the right side of your screen, type your question in the open area, and click Send to submit. The PowerPoint presentation for today's webcast has been posted to the NAGDA website. If you want to have a hard copy of the PowerPoint in front of you and haven't downloaded it yet, you can access it on the NAGDA homepage at www.nagda.org and follow the link in the News and Events section located in the middle of the homepage. NAGDA couldn't offer the 2016 webinars without the financial support of our industry members. Those sponsors include AXA, Empower, ICMARC, Lincoln Financial Group, MassMutual, Prudential, TIAA, VALIC, Voya, the Siegel Group, and Wellington Management. We're so grateful for the support of these industry sponsors. Now on to the presentation. Ed, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, I'm Ed Rutherford, Business Division Manager for Larimer County, Colorado's Human Services Department and immediate past president of the NAGDA Board. I am also chair of the NAGDA Legislative Committee. Our presenter today is John Shiner. John has been involved in government affairs for more than 30 years. He began his career on Capitol Hill in 1969, working extensively on tax matters, healthcare financing, trade, Social Security, and income security issues. He also has extensive experience with matters before the Committees on Appropriations, Energy and Commerce, and Financial Services, and the corresponding Senate committees. John is a graduate of the George Washington University and the New York University School of Law. He is a member of the Bar in New York and the District of Columbia. Today, John will be reviewing the political scene in Washington, discussing NAGDA's legislative priorities as presented in a letter to key legislators during meetings on the Hill in March, and what all this means for the future. John, thanks again for taking time to be with us.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity, and do enjoy your little bio of me. It makes me feel like I'm getting old, but still have something to say. This year, as we approach the election in November, we have had a Senate of 54 Republicans and 44 Democrats and 2 independents, although one of those independents seems to be running around claiming he's a Democrat, at least across the country. That is Bernie Sanders. In the House, there's a larger majority of 246 Republicans, 188 Democrats, and 1 vacancy. The Senate Majority Leader is Mitch McConnell. You've probably heard about him a great deal, and his counterpart as the Minority Leader is Harry Reid. The Speaker of the House is Paul Ryan from Wisconsin. His Majority Leader is Kevin McCarthy from California, and the Minority Leader is Nancy Pelosi, who had been Speaker when the Democrats were in power. It's interesting that the Republican Party is having some issues these days, and one could argue that they are a bit split, not only at the presidential level, but at the House and Senate levels as well. And we'll see what the rest of the election process means in terms of anything coming to fruition in this remaining part of the legislative year. As for the presidential election, it's interesting to note that all the presidential candidates have taken positions on Social Security, but only one, and he's no longer running, Senator Marco Rubio, made any statements on retirement savings and security. He had proposed that all Americans be able to participate in the Federal Employees Thrift Savings Plan, which is essentially a defined contribution plan. And one of the reasons I suspect he urged people to be able to participate in this because it's a very efficient plan and already running it at a large size. One of the first things we've done this year at NAGDA in terms of legislation is to renew our effort for the National Retirement Security Week. Senate Resolution 263 has been introduced by Senators Ben Cardin of Maryland and Mike Enzi of Wyoming, and it is before the Senate Finance Committee, and a number of the members on that committee are supportive of it. It would be the week of October 18th to 24th of 2016. It's been a very successful program for NAGDA members. because it gives them a platform on which to encourage folks to think about saving for retirement and what they should do about their retirement security. Tracy, I think there's a time now for a polling question.
Yes, thanks, John. The first polling question that we have is, do you plan to participate in National Retirement Security Week? You'll find the poll on the right side of your screen at the bottom. You click yes, no, or not sure yet. So as those polls are coming in, John, if you want to go ahead. I think
Sure.
we see there most people are saying that they do plan to participate, which we appreciate.
That's wonderful. In addition to National Retirement Security Week, the high legislative priorities for NAGDA this year are, of course, to maintain the preferred tax treatment of retirement savings, both in terms of the amount of money that can be put into a plan and be deferred, as well as the exemption from the 10% penalty for withdrawals upon separation of service. We also want to see Roth assets exempted from the required minimum distribution requirements. We want to lower the cost of improving retirement outcomes with some of the technical problems to get at. That would be allowing rollovers from Roth IRAs to governmental DC plans, to eliminate the first day of the month requirement, and to increase the eligibility for low-income savers tax credit, and to be able to, if possible, to include the savers credit on the easy form, the 140 easy form. For some reason, it's not on there. We're not exactly sure why, and maybe the page just isn't big enough. The federal budget this year came out, as it does in February. Budget process has been pretty slow and pretty inconclusive at the congressional level, but it's worth discussing what has the administration proposed, and because it may very well come up in future legislation. The administration proposed its budget in February. It did not include any major comprehensive tax reform proposals. And in terms of pensions, it had a few proposals. One, to provide for an automatic IRAs and to give tax credits for creating them, mostly meant for small businesses. And it also would permit unaffiliated employers to maintain a single multiple employer defined contribution plan. In other words, simplifying some of the rules so that you wouldn't be disqualifying the entire plan because maybe one employer fouled something up. It's the belief that this would allow a lot of small businesses to be able to set up defined contribution plans and take advantage of the economies of scale. The administration also proposed to simplify required minimum distributions, one, to treat all Roth IRAs like other retirement plans, and to exempt balances of less than $100,000 from any required minimum distribution. The administration proposed to expand the penalty-free withdrawals for long-term unemployed, and then also to require retirement plans to allow long-term and part-time workers to participate. Also to make annuities more portable, and to allow inherited plans to be rolled over in 60 days. Also, in terms of raising revenue or tightening the rules, require non-spouse beneficiaries of deceased IRA owners and retirement plan participants to take their inherited distributions over no more than 5 years. And finally, the administration renewed its effort to put a limit on the total amount that can be accrued in tax-favored retirement benefit plans to the amount necessary to provide for a maximum annuity permitted under the tax-qualified defined benefit plans. That's about $210,000. That proposal came out in the budget for 2016, again in 2017, and one could imagine it will not pass and become law. Nobody seems to think it's a very good idea other than a few folks at the Treasury Department. Also, what do we talk about tax reform? Well, everybody talks about it, and not too many people do anything about it. It's been 30 years since the last big tax reform act. That was in 1986. And that was became the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, which replaced the Internal Revenue Code of 1954. Between 1954 and 1986, also about 30 some odd years, there were some significant fundamental changes in the tax law. But since 1986, there really haven't been too many fundamental changes. Mostly, we've seen rate increases or rate cuts. So we have seen more important issues about what is happening with business taxes. Why? Because business has changed. In the last 30 years, we've seen an explosion of multinational business. As you may know, and you've heard in this presidential campaign, a whole lot of talk about international business, about businesses moving abroad, about businesses demanding America. So what we've seen is one of the major issues in tax reform is how do we tax foreign earned income of American multinationals? Because of the difference in tax rates abroad, and many American corporations invest a lot abroad, but they don't bring their profits back because you don't have to be taxed on it until you bring it back. As a result, there's over $1 trillion of U.S. profits sitting abroad that hasn't been brought back because when they bring it back, they have to tax it. There's a big controversy about how to do that, and there are, when I say controversy, there are folks who say, oh, let them bring it back, and there are folks who say, never, that they should pay taxes on it. What we have seen is corporations trying to avoid taxes by doing inversions. That is to say, as you may have read about with Pfizer, the deal fell through because of Treasury's changing the rules. Pfizer was going to merge with Allergan. Allergan had become an Irish company. That way, Pfizer would no longer be an American company, and its foreign-based income would never be taxed in the United States. Treasury Department came in with some rules, which they had the authority to issue, and the deal fell apart. Those rules affected how money would transfer between Pfizer America and Pfizer Ireland. Another big issue in the tax reform area is what's called carried interest. This is where general partners who manage private equity and real estate partnerships are paid a portion of their profits of capital transactions without having necessarily invested capital themselves. The issue is whether these shares of the profits, not related to their financial contributions to the partnership, should be taxed at ordinary income or the capital gains rate. And right now, that income is taxed at ordinary income and has created a great deal of controversy. Again, not likely to be settled. I think with only about 40 some odd days of legislation left between now and the conventions and maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks afterwards and maybe a lame duck session, it's highly unlikely that a complicated tax bill will be brought before Congress and dealt with and sent to the president at least in 2016. Perhaps with a new president in 2017, we'll see the beginnings of tax reform, but we'll have to wait and see. Perhaps the most important new legislative or regulatory issue that has emerged in the last few months has been the Department of Labor's issuing of a final rule for its fiduciary standards. The Department of Labor published its final fiduciary rule for defined contribution retirement plans on April 6th. State and local government defined contribution plans are not bound by ERISA and the DOL rules, but we can expect that the providers of investment services will likely treat participants in government plans very similar to those in ERISA-covered plans. So what the fiduciary rule says is very important to many of the NAGDA members who follow ERISA guidelines on their own or whose providers will be following ERISA guidelines. The DOL had released their first draft of the proposed fiduciary rule in 2010, and they withdrew it, their first set, after considerable discussion. They were revised and reissued last year, and of course, like I said, on April 6th, they came out with rules. Tracy, you have a polling question at this time, don't you?
Yes, John. I'll pull that up here. Again, this is going to be located in the right side of your screen at the bottom. And the question is, do you anticipate any changes to your investment advice as a result of the new fiduciary rule? And the answers are yes, no, or not sure. So those are continuing to come in. Keep answering the question there. There be lots of people responding. Still getting more in. It looks like the majority of folks are, at least about half are saying no, and the rest of the group are split between yes and not sure.
Okay.
So, John, you want to?
Sure. Let's go over a few of the things in this fiduciary rule. It is quite long, about 800 pages, so I'm not going to go over every detail. The just issued final rule reflects many of the issues that have been raised by the investment services community based on their discussion of the proposed rule. One important concession made by the Department of Labor is that the rule does not become effective until the beginning of 2018. The Department of Labor decided that if this rule is going to be as complex as many people think it's going to be and make significant changes, you'd really have to give people a decent amount of time to make the kind of changes and to provide the kind of education and training to people involved in the industry so that they would be able to comply with the rules. Nevertheless, the revisions haven't ended the controversy about the rules. Some people would like to see the Securities and Exchange Commission provide new fiduciary rules, but there is no indication that the SEC is working terribly quickly to make anything happen. There's no anticipated date for any SEC rules on fiduciary standards. If indeed there was a rule from the Securities and Exchange Commission, it would apply to state and local defined contribution plans, unlike the ERISA-based Department of Labor rules. And there also is legislation in Congress to block the rule and to require the SEC to act first. Just this week, members of the House and Senate committees of jurisdiction introduced legislation under what's called the Congressional Review Procedure. This legislation would allow Congress to vote on a resolution to prevent the rule from going into effect. However, that resolution would be subject to the signing or veto of the President. If the President vetoed it, it could not go into effect unless there was a two-thirds override. It is most people's estimation that there will not be two-thirds of the House or Senate agreeing to override President Obama's veto of any congressional review resolution that would stop the fiduciary rule from going into effect. In fact, this is one of the few times where the President vocally and demonstratively spoke out in favor of a rule because he believed it was very, very important from his point of view, to secure the savings of employees heading towards retirement. The rules impose fiduciary responsibilities upon brokers and dealers providing services to employees, while the funds are in the employer-sponsored defined contribution accounts, and through the time the funds are rolled over from those accounts. Once they're finally rolled over into an IRA, these rules would no longer have any effect because they would no longer be related to the employment. But up to that point, they would. And the rollover experience is a very important part of the retirement plan, and the rollover experience would be subject to the fiduciary rules. It would require retirement investment services providers to put their clients' best interests first by expanding the types of retirement investment advice covered by fiduciary projections. Any individual receiving compensation for providing advice that is an individualized or specifically directed to a particular plan sponsor, e.g., for example, an employer with a retirement plan, a plan participant or IRA owner for consideration in making a retirement investment decision is considered a fiduciary. Previously, essentially, brokers were not considered fiduciaries, and neither were insurance agents, but now they would be, and that was a very big difference. The decisions that could be affected include, but are not limited to, what assets to purchase or sell, whether to roll over from an employer-based plan to an IRA or not, and it doesn't matter if who the fiduciary is. If the fiduciary could be a broker, a registered investment advisor, an insurance agent, or other type of advisor. Being a fiduciary simply means the advisor must provide impartial advice in their client's best interest and cannot accept payments creating conflicts of interest unless they qualify for an exemption intended to ensure that the customer is adequately protected. There is a device to help define what is being adequately protected. It's called the best interest contract exemption. This contract will allow firms to continue to set their own compensation practices so long as they do, among other things, commit to putting their client's best interest first and disclose any conflicts that might prevent them from doing so. To qualify for a best interest contract exemption, the company and individual advisor providing the retirement investment advice must enter into a contract with its clients that commits the firm and advisor to providing advice in the client's best interest, warrants that the firm has adopted policies and procedures designed to mitigate conflicts of interest, and clearly and prominently discloses any conflicts of interest that might prevent the advisor from providing advice to the client's best interest. So where the controversy? Well, the DOL believes the new rules will save employees saving for retirement and entering retirement significant amounts. There's studies that show the amounts in the billions. DOL contention is that in many cases, employees and new retirees are advised to invest in expensive products that often yield those offering the products excessive compensation in contrast to the returns to the investors. Those opposed to the rules contend that these rules will limit the availability of advice for many employees and retirees because it becomes financially impossible to provide advice in several products under these rules. These opponents contend that in order to assure evidence of acting as a proper fiduciary, organizations and individuals offering financial advice and products will be overwhelmed by record keeping and the ever-present threat of legal action, even where they don't believe they've done anything wrong. I think the great fear, quite frankly, and my own feeling is there's an awful lot of people out there in the investment community who are afraid, even when they do the best they can and the fairest they can, if the investment goes south, goes sour for any reason beyond their control or anybody's control, that they will end up being the subject of lawsuits for people who have lost their money in investments. And they're afraid of what you might consider the analogy to the doctors or medical malpractice experience. Excuse me, there have been two major pieces of legislation besides the congressional review legislation that would affect the fiduciary rule. H.R. 1090 was passed by the House, although it has not gone anywhere in the Senate, which essentially, in a nutshell, said, don't issue the rule until the Securities Exchange Commission issues their rule. Later on this year, a few months back, H.R. 4293 and S. 2502 were reported by their respective committees in the House and the Senate. The bill amends ERISA to define investment advice and has a much less restrictive rules on what is required of those people providing services to employees who are investing for their retirement. Again, those two bills may have become academic in view of the issuing of the final rule. So let's see. That's about it on the fiduciary rule. So the only one other big issue that's still outstanding for NAGDA members from a regulatory point of view, and that is sometime earlier this year, the Department of Treasury had put out some proposals on how to deal with charter schools. Many charter schools are considered governmental agencies because of the way they're funded and controlled, even though they're not part of the regular school system. So in January, the Treasury Department announced it was considering issuing proposed regulations regarding the extent to which government retirement systems cover employees of public charter schools within the meaning of the government plan as set forth in the Internal Revenue Code. NAGDA responded, along with other organizations that represent government employee retirement plans, responded and without opposition to the idea of charter schools. It was indifferent to the question of charter schools. The most important questions that NAGDA members had were, how do you administer this? How do you make sure that that de minimis mistakes don't undermine entire plans? How do you deal with transitions? How do you deal with grandfathering? What do you do if a charter school no longer is a governmental plan because it's changed the way it's operating? And what do you do with all the money that's already in the plan, in the retirement plan? A whole bunch of technical questions. And we are waiting for Treasury to tell us what they think of our questions, although there is every reason to believe they are sympathetic. We'll try to work something out that makes it possible to administer defined contribution plans that include, among other groups, charter schools. That's about it. Tracy, if you got any people have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you, John. We appreciate you keeping a pulse on legislation that affects NAGDA members and updating us on these important issues. I hope everyone found John's presentation valuable. Thank you for participating in this webinar. At this time, I will turn it over to Tracy for questions.
Okay, thanks, Ed. you should see on your screen, it kind of took over from where the slides were showing. You should see a big box for questions. You can submit those in. We have a couple that have come in, and we'll encourage everyone to continue to submit those. If we aren't able to get to your question today, we'll follow up afterwards. Also want to remind everyone that a copy of the slides are available on the NAGDA homepage, right in the center under News and Events. If you click on that, you'll get to the slides, and we will also have a recording of the event available within a few days on the NAGDA website. So Ed, I'll turn it back over to you.
Second one?
Second one, Vance.
Yeah, would Retirement Security Week be October 16th through the 22nd of 2016?
Yes. It's 18th to 24th.
18th through the 24th.
Of 2016. A little bit different.
Yeah, National Retirement Security Week is always the third full week in October.
Okay. Any more questions?
So just to correct, I think, John, you and I were looking at the month of September, looking at the annual conference. So October, the third full week, is October 16th through the 22nd. So the question that came in, yes,
He's right.
October 16th through the 22nd, 2016. Sorry for that confusion there. We were on the wrong month. Do we have any other questions? I think those are all the questions that have come in for today. We certainly look forward to seeing everyone at the upcoming NAGDA annual conference later this year in September. That will be in Denver, and registration has opened, so please take a moment to go out and register. I'll also remind all of our government members who are on the phone today that the benchmarking survey is out, and we encourage all of our government members to respond to that. We look forward to seeing the results that brings. That is all we have for today. We appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully we're giving you back about a half hour to do something else. And again, look forward to seeing everyone later this year in Denver. Thanks so much for participating on the webinar, and many thanks to Ed and John for your time today, as well as sharing your expertise. Have a great week.
Thank you, Tracy.